A flight attendant asked a young black woman to give up her seat for a white female passenger, not realizing that she was the owner of the airline. Calmly, she walked onto her first-class flight, dressed casually, eager for the adventure ahead. However, before the plane took off, a flight attendant embarrassed her by asking her to give up her seat for a passenger who appeared to be more elegant. Everyone looked at her like an ordinary young girl, seemingly out of place among the others. They didn't understand that she was not just an ordinary passenger, she was the secret owner of the entire airline. When the plane landed, those who had judged her would have to face an unexpected reality. Before we continue with the story, please share where you're watching this video in the comments section. If you enjoy stories like this, remember to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to receive the latest videos. The sun was setting low in the sky, casting a gentle golden light over everything. Sophia Bennett held her boarding pass firmly in her hand, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. This was the first solo trip she was taking, a gift from her father for her excellent academic achievements. He had surprised her with a first-class ticket, telling her she deserved to experience the world in luxury. Wearing a simple gray hoodie and old sneakers, Sophia felt like she blended in with the other passengers. In fact, she liked it that way. Blending in was easier and safer. She boarded the plane, greeted the flight attendants politely at the entrance, and sat in the 2D window seat. The seat was very spacious and comfortable, with a thick blanket neatly folded on it. Sophia smiled gently, stuffed her backpack under the seat in front, and took out a book she had read many times. Around her, well-dressed men and women were settling into their seats, having small conversations or scrolling through their phones. A few people glanced at her, some curious, others indifferent. Sophia lowered her face, hoping not to be noticed. When the plane door closed, a flight attendant named Emily Scott began walking through the first-class area, checking seatbelts and offering light smiles. She exuded a sharp elegance from her perfectly styled hair to the creases in her dress. Emily greeted an elderly gentleman in a business suit with a cheerful laugh and handed a blanket to a woman wearing pearls. However, when she reached Sophia's seat, her smile revealed a clear hesitation. Emily stopped next to her, adjusted her sleeve, and then spoke. "Excuse me, are you sure this is your seat?" The girl looked up a bit surprised and quickly nodded. She fumbled through the pocket of her hoodie and pulled out the ticket. "Sure, this is seat 2D, she said. Emily took the ticket and discreetly checked it, her eyes shifting back and forth between the ticket and Sophia. Just as she was about to speak again, another woman approached Emily. She stood tall in a sharp white coat, holding a handbag that might be worth more than the entire outfit Sophia wore in a year. The name tag on her read, Olivia Peterson. Though she spoke quietly to Emily, Sophia could hear every word. "Is something wrong? I was informed this seat was reserved for me." Emily looked at Olivia Peterson and nodded, then turned back to Sophia, raising her voice so that everyone around could hear. "It seems there has been a mix-up with the seating arrangement. You will need to move to another seat to give this one to this guest." Sophia stared at her confusion written all over her face. "But this is my seat," she whispered. "I have a ticket." Olivia Peterson gently waved her delicate hand on the handle of her handbag. Emily's smile became even more strained. "I understand, but this seat was specifically assigned to one of our frequent flyers." She pointed to Olivia Peterson. "We will arrange another seat for you further back. Thank you for understanding." The attention from the other passengers began to shift. Sophia felt the stares on her like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. She wanted to protest and stand up for her rights. However, the deep embarrassment weakened her resolve. Her hands trembling, she quickly grabbed her backpack, shoved her book inside, and avoided the gazes of everyone. Olivia Peterson sat down immediately after Sophia stood up, not saying a word or even looking at her. Emily nodded, signaling agreement, and led Sophia to the back of the plane. She found herself sitting in a middle seat near the restroom, where the smell of cleaning products and damp air enveloped her. She sat stiffly in the seat, her eyes fixed on the tray table in front of her, trying to suppress the urge to cry. She took out her phone from her backpack and quickly typed a short message to her father. "I was moved to the back because someone else needed my seat. I chose not to argue." She hit send and tucked her phone away, resting her forehead against the cold window. The plane began to hum as the engines started. However, Sophia Bennett's thoughts were racing too quickly for her to pay attention. In the first-class cabin, Olivia Peterson sipped her champagne, while Emily Scott moved down the aisle, serving drinks and wearing a strange smile, having ignored the girl she had misjudged. The captain whispered into his headset, but neither of them realized. They didn't realize that Sophia was not just an ordinary girl. She was the founder and owner of the airline they were flying with. Sophia sat motionless in the cramped economy seat as the plane gradually ascended. She barely felt the weightlessness as the plane gained altitude. Her thoughts kept revolving around the events that had just happened. She hadn't done anything wrong. She had been very polite. She had her ticket, yet she had been overlooked like an outsider. She stared at the back of the seat in front of her, a lump rising in her throat, but she was determined to hold it back. She didn't want to cry, not in front of these strangers. Her phone buzzed on her lap. Sophia glanced down and noticed a message from her father. His message was brief but firm. "Stay calm. Don't worry, I'll handle this." Sophia swallowed, her heart beating faster. Her father was usually calm. However, she understood that when he said he would handle the situation, it meant that someone else would soon realize the gravity of the mistake they had made. In the first-class cabin, Emily Scott completed the final checks and returned to the galley wearing a satisfied smile. Olivia Peterson leaned back, donning a silk sleep mask, preparing for a peaceful flight. As she had expected, Emily quickly poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, chatting lightly with another flight attendant named Hannah Price. "Some people really don't get this situation," Emily said with a soft laugh. "Not everyone belongs in first class. It's obvious when someone feels like they don't belong here." Hannah Price remained silent as she had noticed Sophia's clear discomfort. She had seen the ticket and knew the seating arrangement was correct. However, Hannah understood Emily well enough to keep quiet. Emily had a way of making problems for anyone who dared confront her. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain William Harris adjusted his headset to receive a call from ground control through the private line. Captain William Harris raised an eyebrow as he listened. He didn't interrupt, simply nodded slowly and answered briefly. "Understood. I'll handle it." He put the headset down, glancing over at First Officer Ryan Clark, who looked back with a skeptical expression. Speechless, Ryan Clark quietly asked, "What's going on?" Captain William Harris replied with a brief, restrained smile. "It seems we have a situation in first class, a seating change. The girl who was moved to the back actually doesn't just have a ticket." "Ryan," Clark's eyes widened. "You're kidding, right?" Captain William Harris sighed unexpectedly. "Jonathan Brooks, her father is the founder and majority owner of this airline. He's been watching all the events from the control tower." Ryan Clark sighed lightly. "Emily Scott is in for a really bad day." Captain William Harris nodded and pressed the intercom button. His voice was steady and professional, but with a sharpness that hadn't been there before. "Attention, all flight attendants. We have received information about an emergency seating issue and require immediate action. The chief flight attendant is requested to report to the cockpit as soon as possible." In the galley, Emily Scott stood up, her face puzzled as she turned to Hannah Price, who could only shrug. Emily set her coffee cup down calmly and headed forward, completely unaware that her life was about to be turned upside down. Emily adjusted her uniform carefully as she neared the cockpit door and smiled brightly. She gently knocked on the door and waited a moment. When the door opened, Captain William Harris gestured for her to enter. She stepped in confidently, expecting it to be just a brief reminder about customer service or some complaint from a passenger. However, she was shocked by the cold, serious gaze of both pilots. She had every right to sit there. Sophia Bennett owned a first-class ticket. No mistake had occurred. Emily Scott opened her mouth, searching for the right words, but Captain William Harris gestured for silence. The situation is getting worse. Her name is Emma Carter. Jonathan Brooks is her father. The name struck her like a heavy blow. Emily straightened up, feeling her mouth dry. She recognized the name from before. It was a name very familiar to everyone in the airline industry. Jonathan Brooks was not just the founder. He was an icon, a symbol of wealth, and a person with influence, the one who ran the entire system. Sir Captain William Harris spoke directly to the ground operations team, his voice sharp, cutting through the thick air. He spoke clearly. Immediate action is needed. Get the passenger back to her original seat. She will need to publicly apologize, and when we land, she will be required to attend an official debriefing with the company's executives. Emily Scott felt the blood drain from her face. She had dealt with angry customers in the past. She had handled complaints and persuaded difficult passengers, but this situation was different. This wasn't just a forgotten drink order or a misplaced bag. This was about humiliating the daughter of the airline's owner in front of many passengers on the plane. "I didn't know." Emily stammered, the words slipping out of her mouth. "You didn't take the time to check." Captain William Harris corrected her. His voice, calm, but the disappointment in it cut into Emily more than any reprimand could. "You judged her by her appearance, and now it's time to make it right." He grabbed the intercom and pressed the button. "Attention, all flight attendants." Emily Scott continued to signal and made her way back to the economy section without hesitation. She stood unsteadily, her heart pounding in her chest. She walked out of the cockpit in silence, her thoughts a whirlwind of fear and regret. As she passed through the first-class cabin, she felt the curious gazes of the passengers following her. They didn't know what was happening, but that would soon change. For the first time in her career, Emily wished she could sink into the floor. Sophia Bennett still sat still in her cramped seat, her arms folded across her chest. She stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by gently, but her thoughts were anything but peaceful. Her phone buzzed again on her lap, prompting her to look down and see a new message from her father. "Hold your ground. Let them come to you." She quickly hid the phone, trying to keep it out of sight from the people around her. She felt the shift in energy in the space just before she looked up. A silence enveloped the cabin. Passengers adjusted their seats, trying to glance down the aisle. Sophia Bennett glanced to the side and saw Emily Scott walking toward her, her movements stiff, her smile unnatural and forced. Emily stopped in front of Sophia, her cheeks slightly reddened as she leaned down just a little to meet her gaze. "Ms. Brennan," she called loudly, her voice carrying to those around them. "It seems there has been a mix-up with your seating arrangement. We'd like to ask you to return to your original seat in first class." Sophia blinked slowly, maintaining a calm expression. She could feel the eyes of every passenger on her at that moment. Whispers began to spread. Emily moved awkwardly, trying to put on a weak smile. "We're truly sorry for the inconvenience." Sophia hesitated before moving. She allowed the silence to stretch long enough to make Emily uncomfortable. Then she looked straight at her, her gaze cold. "Are you implying that I wasn't in the right seat from the beginning?" Emily blushed. She nodded stiffly. "Of course, ma'am." Sophia's words rang out clearly, but with challenge, needing no further elaboration. Emily opened her mouth but couldn't respond. She hesitated, feeling trapped in the situation. Finally, Sophia stood up, her posture straight, her chin held high with confidence. She slowly picked up her backpack, allowing Emily to realize the significance of this moment. The passengers around them no longer tried to maintain polite facades. Some stared directly at her, while others turned away, embarrassed for having silently observed Sophia. Bennett walked down the aisle. Emily gestured for her to follow her movements, stiff and anxious. As they made their way to the first-class cabin, it felt like the entire plane was watching them. Sophia kept her eyes straight ahead, each step making her feel more grounded, not because she wanted revenge, but because she realized everyone was witnessing this. This time, everyone was aware and could no longer pretend not to know. Emily. Scott pointed to the empty window seat, the one that Sophia Bennett should have been sitting in from the start. Sophia paused, her hand lightly brushing over the back of the seat for a brief moment. She slightly tilted her body, her tone calm, but clear enough for those closest to hear. "I have my ticket. I presented my ticket when I boarded," she said, her demeanor composed, almost indifferent. "Yet it seems some people think I don't have the right to sit here." That simple statement, though, sliced through the first-class cabin sharply and powerfully. A few passengers could no longer maintain their silence. Instead, they looked around, exchanging uneasy glances, feeling uncomfortable. Emily began to speak, but immediately stopped, realizing that any words from her would only complicate things further. Sophia Bennett slowly sat down, no longer paying attention to Emily Scott or Olivia Peterson. She carefully placed her backpack under the seat in front of her, then took out her favorite book and resumed reading as if everything were normal. However, the atmosphere around her had completely changed. Emily stood next to her for a moment, but then awkwardly bent down. "If you need any assistance, please don't hesitate to let me know," she whispered. Sophia kept her eyes on the book, turning a page, the sound of the paper rustling louder than anything that could be said. Emily stood up straight, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and quickly moved back toward the next cabin. The rest of first class remained stunned, a few passengers unable to stop glancing at her. After a while, conversations began to resume, but still hesitant, filled with uncertainty and furtive glances. Passengers may have returned to their drinks or magazines, but the image of Sophia returning to her seat had been burned into their minds. As for Emily Scott, that moment was now slowly weighing heavily on her. She staggered back toward the flight attendant section, gripping the counter tightly, feeling sweat dampen the back of her neck, even though the airplane still had cool air. Hannah Price was still nearby, pretending to arrange snacks on a tray. However, her eyes never stopped observing. "Are you okay?" Hannah asked, her voice soft. Emily glanced at her, her eyes sharp enough to shatter glass. "I'm fine," she replied, but deep inside she knew she wasn't fine. Not at all. The thoughts of everything she had done throughout the flight kept nagging at her. She realized she had crossed a line she couldn't go back from. Hannah Price fell silent for a moment, then continued. "You realize she's not just an ordinary passenger, right?" "Indeed," Emily Scott answered, her voice whispering but firm. I realized that Hannah didn't say anything more, only silently observed, letting the silence speak for itself. Emily silently continued to reflect on every decision she had made. She realized that she had been too quick to judge, just looking at the appearance of Sophia Bennett, a young girl dressed simply and casually, and had misjudged her. Now she couldn't escape the consequences of her own actions. Meanwhile, Sophia Bennett sat quietly in her seat, unconcerned by the furtive glances from all around. She knew that those who had overlooked her before would now have to face the truth. Emily Scott glanced up at the control panel, her hand gripping the counter tightly as the tension grew stronger with each passing moment. She knew things would no longer be simple. A part of her understood that nothing could fix the situation now, even if she tried to offer a drink, add a blanket, or even say a genuine apology. Everything had already gone too far. She looked down at her hands when suddenly the intercom crackled. "Flight crew, prepare for the mid-flight assessment." Although the announcement was vague, the tone was unmistakable. This wasn't a routine flight procedure. Emily felt a shiver run down her spine. She knew this had nothing to do with service or safety. It was about her. Captain William Harris had issued a new directive, and Jonathan Brooks had made sure that what was about to happen couldn't easily be ignored. Emily took a deep breath, adjusted her jacket, and forced a weak smile. She returned to the first-class cabin, pushing the drink cart ahead of her, her arms stiff. "Would you like anything, ma'am?" she asked. Her tone strained and overly cheerful. Sophia Bennett slowly raised her head, her sharp eyes locking onto Emily. The cabin went silent. Everyone focused on the exchange. "I'm fine," Sophia replied softly, then returned to her book. Emily's smile weakened, but she nodded and stepped back, grabbing the cart and continuing down the aisle. A man in a gray suit leaned toward Sophia. His voice was soft and slightly uncertain. "Ma'am, I just wanted to say that I witnessed what happened earlier. That wasn't fair." Sophia looked at him for a brief moment, then nodded gently, but said nothing. She felt no need to respond. An elderly woman sitting a few rows away also turned to look, her expression a bit awkward. "I wish I had known she began feeling uneasy. Maybe I would have said something." Sophia simply smiled softly and went back to reading. The passengers might have held on to their apologies, but by staying silent, they had made their choice. Now they would have to face the discomfort of that decision. Meanwhile, Emily continued moving toward the front of the plane, her heart pounding. She believed that if she stayed silent until the plane landed, perhaps everything would be okay. Maybe it would all pass. But she was wrong, because as she reached the flight attendant area, Captain William Harris's voice came through the intercom. Once again, this time softer, but still carrying an unmistakable seriousness. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the inconvenience earlier regarding the seating change. We are pleased to announce that the issue has been resolved. Thank you for your understanding." The announcement seemed harmless, perhaps a small matter to most passengers. But to Emily it was like a warning, a clear signal that the airline wouldn't let things settle without attention. She leaned against the counter, her legs shaking. She could feel that something bigger awaited her as soon as the plane touched down. This was a situation she couldn't easily explain away. Sophia Bennett adjusted her posture, the leather seat creaking slightly as she looked down at the phone resting on her lap. A new message from her father had just arrived. Sophia gently tapped the screen. "The gate will be monitored by security and operations staff. Stay calm. You will have an escort." She tucked the phone away without showing any emotion. They sat there pretending everything was normal, but a storm was beginning to form just beneath the surface. Olivia Peterson, sitting across from her, now sat stiffly in her seat, peering over her sunglasses at Sophia, her lips tightly pressed. She felt a wave of discomfort when Sophia's gaze met hers. Olivia Peterson quickly turned away, adjusting the luxurious bracelet on her wrist. The opulence, the ease, and the subtle influence that people like Olivia Peterson believed they possessed now seemed to vanish, replaced by an uncomfortable silence and forced smiles. Hannah Price slowly moved the drink cart down the aisle, pretending to check beverage requests. Though she tried her best to blend in, her eyes clearly reflected her anxiety. She glanced quickly at Sophia, then immediately turned away. She hurriedly wanted to escape the chaos as far as possible. Emily Scott stood in the flight attendant area, her back against the wall, breathing lightly. She held a stack of cups just to keep her hands busy, but the trembling in her fingers never stopped. Every time she thought about what awaited them when the plane landed, her stomach twisted in pain. Sophia Bennett felt her heart pounding in her chest as the plane began its gradual descent. She loosened her seatbelt and looked out the window, watching the vast landscape below. The feeling wasn't fear, but a calm confidence. She didn't need to speak up or cause a scene to make the truth of this situation clear. All she needed was a little patience as the consequences were already beginning to unfold. Olivia Peterson sat across the aisle, her hand nervously tugging at her sleeve as she glanced through the partition separating first class from the rest of the cabin. Sophia turned away again, not needing to respond to that glance. Olivia's anxiety was an unspoken apology. The plane gently rumbled as it began to descend through the clouds, the wheels making a soft sound as they touched the runway. Sophia rested her hand on her lap, her gaze steady, her breathing even and calm. In the flight attendant area, Emily Scott stood still, her eyes watching the closed door, her mind racing. Perhaps she should offer another apology, maybe she could explain. But deep down, she understood that all of that no longer mattered. Emily had decided the moment she saw Sophia that she didn't belong there. She had made a choice, and her actions couldn't change the fact that the one who deserved no reconsideration at all was the one who had witnessed everything. The lights in the cabin gradually dimmed as the plane approached the runway, the wheels making a soft squeal as they touched down, then glided smoothly along the tarmac. Sophia Bennett remained in her seat, her eyes unwavering as the plane neared the exit. Her phone buzzed again. She glanced down but didn't pick it up. "The security team is ready. Please remain seated. They will be with you first." The engines roared as the plane came to a stop. The seatbelt sign went off. Passengers began gathering their belongings, attempting to create a sense of normalcy around her. But it was no longer normal. Everything had changed. Those who had silently observed those who hadn't spoken when she was humiliated would now witness firsthand what true responsibility looked like. The familiar sound of seatbelt signs being turned off echoed through the cabin, but everyone stood still for a moment. The usual rush of retrieving items from overhead bins or the hurried goodbyes gave way to a strange stillness, as if everyone sensed an event about to unfold. Yet no one dared to break the silence. Sophia remained seated, calm and unmoving. Her backpack was neatly tucked under the seat in front of her. With deliberate and purposeful movements, she adjusted her jacket, feeling the weight of the eyes on her, but choosing to ignore them all. A faint rustling sound came from the cabin door, and then the door swung open. Instead of the usual jetway crew, 2 security guards in uniforms entered. They remained calm, but the seriousness in their eyes spoke volumes, the unspoken message echoing through the cabin. A man in a navy blue suit held a clipboard behind them. His identification badge gleamed under the overhead lights, marking him as a senior executive of the airline. Passengers tensed. A few people craned their necks to get a better look. Others lowered their heads, pretending not to notice the sudden appearance of authority moving down the aisle. The executive spoke clearly, his tone polite but decisive. "Emma Carter?" he asked. Though he already knew her immediately, seeing her sitting quietly unperturbed in her surroundings, Sophia gently raised her hand, silently pointing to herself. The manager nodded slightly. "Ms. Brennan, please remain seated for a moment. We'll escort you out first." The tension in the cabin increased. Passengers began whispering among themselves, their curious and doubtful gazes flickering between her. The security guards and the flight attendants standing motionless up front. Olivia Peterson turned pale, shrinking into her seat as if wanting to disappear into it. The manager turned slightly, scanning the crew. His voice, though still calm, now carried an unmistakable sharpness. "Karen Mitchell, you'll accompany us as well." Emily Scott stood still, unable to move. She gripped the drink cart so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She tried to speak, to explain, but found herself speechless, unable to utter a word. As she staggered into the aisle, it felt like her feet were moving on their own. The manager maintained his composed demeanor. He didn't need to act. Every word he spoke exuded power, a command from Jonathan Brooks's office. You will meet with the company officials immediately regarding today's incident. Passengers stepped aside as they made their way down the aisle, staring without a shred of hesitation. A few tried to pretend they didn't care, but their faces betrayed them. Sophia Bennett stood up as the security personnel gently gestured for her to rise. She adjusted the strap of her backpack, maintaining a straight posture, and walked slowly but steadily. As she moved down the aisle, she noticed the swift reactions from the passengers. The man who had previously tried to apologize to her now avoided her gaze. The elderly woman who had said she would have spoken up if she had known was now staring down at the floor. Olivia Peterson, still reclining in her seat, whispered something softly, but Sophia continued walking without stopping or paying attention to her. At this moment, Olivia's words no longer mattered. Emily Scott followed a few steps behind her, cheeks flushed and her heart pounding so loudly that she was sure everyone could hear it. Emily's gaze remained fixed on the floor, feeling weaker than ever. When they reached the plane's door, the security personnel stepped aside to let Sophia exit first. The executive manager gestured respectfully, recognizing her position without speaking. She stepped out onto the jet bridge. The sound of her sneakers lightly tapping the floor was the only sound she focused on. As Emily stepped out under the bright airport lights, she blinked quickly, stunned by the harsh reality of her situation, feeling as though a cold wave had hit her. At the end of the jet bridge stood formal-looking executives, their faces serious and silent. At that moment, Emily Scott realized that this wasn't just about an apology or a meeting. This was a matter of life or death, and her career was hanging by a thread. Sophia paused in the airport, looking back at the plane she had just left. Her face held no smile. She wasn't showing off. She remained calm and composed, still her mere presence conveyed more than any words could. She had been forced to leave her seat because someone had decided she didn't fit their image of who deserved to sit in first class. Yet now everyone had recognized her identity. This time it couldn't be erased. Sophia remained composed as airport staff, and security cleared the way for her to pass through the airport. People at other gates stopped talking, some halting their coffee mid-sip, while others turned their heads to see what was happening. This wasn't something they saw every day. Sophia walked silently, her steps slow and confident. She didn't need to speak. The sight of the executives in suits following her made it clear to everyone that she was someone important, someone they had to pay attention to and respect. Emily Scott took a few steps behind her eyes, still on the floor, her heart racing to the point where the footsteps nearby almost drowned out the sound. She noticed the gazes of the onlookers, their eyes wide, whispering softly as they secretly pulled out their phones to record the scene. Her cheeks reddened with each step. At the end of the path, a tall man in a black suit stood with his arms crossed. His face was calm, but his gaze was sharp. Nathan Clark, the director of customer experience for the airline, was known throughout the company for being serious and uncompromising when it came to any mistreatment of customers. He kept a stoic face as Emily Scott approached. He didn't acknowledge her. He turned his attention to Sophia, nodding respectfully. "Hello, Ms. Brennan," he said, his voice steady and confident. "We've arranged a private car to ensure your next journey is comfortable. Your belongings have been taken care of." Sophia nodded, maintaining her calm demeanor, showing no emotion. Nathan then turned to Emily Scott, his attitude turning colder. "Ms. Hayes, you'll join us." Emily opened her mouth, wanting to present her thoughts and defend her stance. But Nathan raised his hand, signaling for her to remain silent. "A full investigation will be conducted. You'll have the opportunity to explain, but not under these circumstances." Security officers stood beside her, keeping their distance, but clearly signaling that she had to comply. Passengers and staff at the airport watched quietly, some whispering, others shaking their heads in disbelief at what was unfolding. The sense of shame Emily had once easily caused in others now clung to her like heavy chains, impossible to shake off. Sophia walked toward a sleek black car parked just outside the terminal. A driver in a neat uniform opened the rear door for her, bowing his head. Gently, Sophia stepped into the car, the cool leather seat pressing against her body. As the door closed behind her, she finally let out a deep sigh of relief, relaxing. The car pulled away from the curb, and the airport gradually faded behind her. Sophia looked out through the darkened window, watching the busy airport, the crowds of passengers, the long lines at check-in, and the world continuing as usual. Only now, power and privilege had crumbled around Emily. Emily Scott was led down a separate corridor away from the busy areas of the airport toward a set of gray double doors that most staff members avoided getting too close to. Behind those doors was a modest meeting room reserved for the executives' evaluations. Many had entered these rooms and left without their company badges. With every step Emily took, the weight of the situation grew heavier. She thought back to the day she had received her job offer, the sense of pride that had filled her as she spent countless hours dedicating herself to the work. She remembered how quick judgments about passengers had become routine, as if determining who was worthy and who wasn't was a normal part of the job. She had convinced herself it was about organization, about professionalism. But now, with her power slipping away, she realized it was nothing more than unchecked bias, rudeness, and discomfort. The door opened in front of her and she was invited inside. Nathan Clark entered right after placing a heavy folder on the table before sitting across from her. He slowly opened the folder, flipping through the pages with focused attention. Complaints, witness statements, and even security camera footage from the plane's cabin. Each piece of evidence weighed heavily on Emily, making her feel as if the last remnants of hope were slipping away. Nathan looked up, his tone still professional but distant. "Ms. Hayes, you are here to address serious issues related to misconduct and violations of customer service protocols. Do you have anything you'd like to say before we begin?" Emily swallowed her throat dry. She wanted to justify herself, explain that things weren't as they appeared, but as she faced Nathan, realizing that nothing she said could change what had happened, she understood that there was nothing she could say to improve the situation. Sophia Bennett reclined comfortably in the plush seat of the car as it smoothly made its way toward the private lounge where her father was waiting. She glanced at her phone and saw a message from him. "I'm proud of you for staying calm. I'll see you soon." Sophia smiled faintly, not from a sense of victory, but from a feeling of tranquility. She had kept her composure, she hadn't resisted, she had allowed the truth to assert itself. Sometimes the truth carried a weight far greater than anything else. In the cold meeting room, the clock ticked audibly, each second seeming to intensify the tension in the air. Emily sat upright in the stiff chair opposite Nathan, feeling like a student about to be reprimanded. The situation was much more serious. This wasn't just a reprimand, her career was slipping out of her grasp. Nathan turned to the next page in the folder, his eyes scanning the documents quickly before speaking. "We have statements from 4 first-class passengers who witnessed you asking Miss Brennan to vacate her seat. We have statements from 4 first-class passengers who witnessed you asking Miss Brennan to vacate her seat. You interrogated her without cause and gave priority to another passenger without verifying her ticket." Emily's mouth went dry. She clenched her hands in her lap desperately, wishing she could find something, anything that could reverse the events of the past few hours. "I didn't intend to cause harm," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nathan didn't change his expression. "Good intentions do not justify actions, Ms. Hayes, especially when those actions involve discrimination against a paying customer." He paused briefly, tapping his fingers lightly on the folder. She is the daughter of the airline's owner. Emily looked down, a deep sense of shame washing over her. Nathan kept his voice steady. In addition to the passengers' complaints, your colleague Ashley Turner has submitted an internal report. She witnessed your actions toward Miss Brennan and expressed concern about your behavior. Emily quickly lifted her head, a strong sense of betrayal overwhelming her. Brooke, the one who had played an unnoticed role throughout the flight, was the one who had reported her. The feeling of unease grew as Nathan continued. Ms. Davis acknowledged that although she didn't act immediately, there will be a separate discussion later regarding her decision. She felt it was necessary to document her observations. As Nathan revealed the identity of the passenger, he slowly closed the folder, the sound of the folder snapping shut, making Emily flinch. Nathan placed his hand on the table. Ms. Hayes, with the evidence we have, the airline will be suspending you immediately without pay while we conduct a final review regarding your termination. Emily started to protest, but he spoke firmly. You will not continue working until this matter is resolved. We expect your full cooperation with the investigation. Any refusal will result in immediate termination and no opportunity for rehire anywhere. Those words weighed heavily on her. She felt an urge to argue, to clarify that everything was a misunderstanding, but deep inside she realized the truth. She had never asked the well-dressed man to present a ticket. She hadn't confronted the woman with the pearls. Instead, she had looked at Sophia, the young, simple girl, and made a judgment based solely on her appearance. Now she had to face the consequences. Meanwhile, Sophia's car pulled into the private entrance reserved for executives and VIPs. Jacob Brooks stood waiting by another black car, his tall and commanding presence able to dominate any space. He watched his daughter step out of the vehicle. Sophia Bennett approached with her back straight and a calm expression. Jacob walked over, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder, offering comfort. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice soft, yet laced with concern. "I'm fine," Sophia replied firmly. And in reality, she was fine. She refused to let the incident defeat her. Instead, it had solidified something inside her, a small but unwavering flame that couldn't be extinguished. Jacob observed her for a moment, then nodded. "Good. You handled the situation with far more composure than most adults could have." He waved her into the private lounge. As they walked through the sleek, luxurious hallways, Jacob spoke with calm resolve. "The board has been informed, adjustments will be made, training initiatives will be revised, oversight, regulations will be tightened." Sophia listened quietly, still holding her silence. For her, this wasn't about policies. It wasn't about corporate meetings or formal apologies. It was about the ease with which people like Emily Scott could decide who deserved respect and the need to prove that such judgments would no longer be accepted. They entered a luxurious, quiet lounge where several executives were already present. Each stood to show respect when they saw Jacob and Sophia. There was no sense that Sophia didn't belong there. Not now. Jacob led her to a chair before turning to face the small group of executives. "Before we proceed with the next steps," he declared with determination, "I want everyone to understand something important." He gently placed a hand on Sophia's shoulder. "This isn't just about one mistake. It's about the kind of organization we want to become. Moving forward." Sophia looked up at him, her heart swelling with pride. This was the first time since the embarrassing incident on the plane that she allowed herself a real smile. Those who had tried to diminish her would now face a reality that she and people like her would no longer be easily overlooked. Justice wasn't just being served today, it would be set for the future. In the meeting room, the air was thick with tension. As Jacob Brooks spoke to the airline's senior executives, each word he spoke carried weight. The room was completely silent. No one dared interrupt or even move. Everyone understood the gravity of the situation. "We will not tolerate discrimination in any form, in any cabin, at any level," Jacob declared, his voice firm but sharp. "This incident didn't just humiliate my daughter, it exposed a flaw in how we interact with our customers." He looked around the room, locking eyes with each executive before continuing. "Starting today, all flight and ground staff will undergo mandatory training. This will be real training, not just signing a document. We will implement undercover passengers to assess service. There will be swift consequences for any employee who treats a passenger differently based on appearance, age, circumstance, or any other factor." Sophia listened in silence, her pride growing. Her father wasn't someone who made empty promises. When he spoke of change, he truly intended to make it happen. Jacob took a deep breath, his voice softening as he turned to Sophia. "This isn't just about apologies. This is about creating a culture that not only addresses mistakes when they occur, but actively prevents them from happening in the first place." The executives nodded in unison, showing their agreement. However, this still wasn't enough. Jacob turned to a man at the end of the table. "Stephen Grant, you will prepare a formal apology, not just to Sophia, but to all passengers who have been unfairly treated. I expect this apology to be made public. No avoidance, no manipulation." Stephen Grant nodded quickly. Taking notes, Jacob continued, speaking to a woman sitting beside him. "Rachel Evans, begin internal audits immediately. I want random checks on flights starting next week. If necessary, bring in external agencies. I want this done thoroughly." Rachel Evans responded with a serious nod. Jacob leaned back slightly, letting his words resonate. "We cannot have any doubt," he said, his tone resolute once more. "This is personal. If we cannot protect the dignity of every passenger regardless of who they are, then we don't deserve to lead this industry." The meeting room fell into silence. After a moment, Jacob stood up, gesturing for Sophia to follow. She stood gracefully, recognizing the eyes of every executive on her. However, this time those gazes no longer carried uncertainty. Instead, they were filled with respect, a recognition that she had made a real impact. As they exited the lounge together, Jacob gently placed his hand on her back. "You didn't need to raise your voice," he said softly. "You didn't need to shout. You stood your ground and let the truth speak for itself. That was true strength." "Sophia?" She looked up at him with a smile, feeling far more at ease than when Emily Scott had stood on her seat with a forced and insincere smile. Sophia was determined that no one would ever again define her worth. Jacob Brooks chuckled softly. "That's my daughter." As they passed through the airport's private hallways, staff quickly stepped aside, bowing their heads in respect. The airport was still full of familiar sounds, boarding announcements, the rolling of suitcases, hushed conversations. However, for Sophia Bennett, everything felt distant, like a world far removed. She was facing a subtle battle and winning with silence, grace, and persistence. In stark contrast to the ease in the luxurious lounge, Emily Scott was now sitting in a small, cramped meeting room, awaiting a decision that she was certain would come. The official review had ended. She had had the chance to voice her perspective, to clarify her thoughts. Yet she felt that her words no longer held weight. It was her actions that had spoken the loudest, and they had sealed her fate. Emily gripped the handle of her suitcase, the suitcase she had packed, thinking it was just a regular flight. But now it was all she had left as she waited for security to escort her. No uniform, no badge, no opportunity for redemption. For years, she had believed her position gave her the right to make snap judgments about who belonged where. But now all it took was one young girl, calm and composed, to shatter that illusion. A soft knock echoed at the door. A security guard approached, professional but cold. "Ms. Emily Scott." "We are ready." Emily slowly stood her suitcase, rolling noisily on the floor as she followed him through the airport's side hallways. A different path from the one Sophia had taken, a journey that no one admired. She focused on the ground, avoiding the gazes of those around her. She walked on the weight of her choices, heavier than any luggage she carried. This time, no apology or excuse could lighten that burden. Under the warm afternoon sun, Sophia and Jacob Brooks moved closer to a sleek black SUV parked at the private terminal entrance. The driver nodded gently as Sophia entered the back seat, Jacob following her. The door closed with a firm thud, cutting off the noise of the airport. As the car smoothly drove away, Sophia allowed herself to lean back in the seat, relaxing. She looked out the window, watching the planes waiting on the tarmac. The noses of the planes pointed toward destinations she might one day explore on her own terms. She would never be forced out of her seat again. Jacob sat silently beside her for a moment, giving her space. Finally, he spoke, his voice soft. "You see, true strength isn't about raising your voice, but standing firm when everyone expects you to fall." Sophia smiled faintly, her gaze fixed on the window. She understood this truth more deeply than ever before. At the airport, news spread quickly. Not only staff, but also passengers joined in the conversation. Videos began to appear online with short clips, capturing the moment. Sophia was guided back to her seat, Emily Scott trailing behind in disbelief. People began sharing their criticisms, praising Sophia's composed grace, and wondering how many similar incidents went unnoticed when no one important was there to witness them. The airline's public relations team worked tirelessly behind the scenes, drafting statements and monitoring social media as the story spread. What started as a private embarrassment had now become a public lesson. This wasn't just about Emily Scott. The airline's reputation was also at stake. In a small room hidden behind one of the terminals, Emily sat alone, her eyes fixed on her phone. She had seen the news notification. She had read the comments. Strangers had identified her by name, calling her arrogant, biased, and indifferent. She flipped the phone over, pressing it face down on the table, unable to bear it any longer. No excuse she had prepared in her mind could fix her actions. No reason could convince her, not even herself. She had spent years building professionalism, sharp instincts, and the ability to understand passengers, but in this moment, without her uniform and without power, she realized she had misjudged everything. Sophia had been polite, fully prepared, and entirely suited for her space, while Emily Scott was the one who truly didn't belong there. A security guard approached the door lightly, clearing his throat to ease the tension. It was time. Emily nodded absent-mindedly, standing and grabbing her small bag. As she walked through the terminal with the security guard by her side, she tried to maintain her composure, but each step felt like a clear acknowledgement of her reality. She felt the eyes of the crowd on her. Some had recognized her from the videos circulating online. Others simply sensed that something was deeply wrong. No one was laughing. No one showed empathy. She had become invisible, not in the way she had made passengers feel, but in the way a person's significance could be completely erased. Outside, a nondescript car waited for her. Not a sleek black SUV, not special treatment, just a quiet ride home with an uncertain future ahead. Jacob Brooks looked at his daughter, seeing the silhouette of Sophia Bennett illuminated by the afternoon sun. "Are you really okay?" he asked again, his voice softer than before. Sophia nodded, her tone steady. "Yes, I'm sure." And in fact, she was more than just okay. She was much stronger. She faced the disrespect with patient silence. She stood firm without needing to raise her voice or diminish her own worth. And she made everyone understand, even those who thought themselves above others, that respect was not a privilege reserved for wealth or status. It was a fundamental right that every individual deserved from the start. From now on, all passengers of Brennan Airlines would carry that thought with them. The SUV glided along the highway, gradually leaving the airport behind and heading toward the city skyline. Sophia rested her head against the window, feeling the rhythm of the road beneath her feet. Her phone buzzed again this time with notifications from friends, classmates, and even acquaintances. She received screenshots of news articles, short video clips from the plane, and posts praising her calmness in the crisis. Some short messages were full of encouragement. "Proud of you. You handled the situation like a pro." Others were longer, with individuals sharing their own experiences of being ignored, mistreated, and wrongly judged. Sophia scrolled through a few messages, her heart tightening. She realized that this story was no longer just hers. It had grown far beyond that. She turned off her phone and set it down, closing her eyes for a moment. Jacob Brooks allowed silence between them, giving Sophia space to reflect on everything. He understood better than anyone the weight that sudden attention could bring, even when accompanied by praise. Meanwhile, at the airport, a public statement from Brennan Airlines was released. A carefully drafted letter was shared across all major social media platforms, posted on the website, and even printed and displayed on notice boards in terminals. Brennan Airlines is committed to respecting the dignity, fairness, and respect of every passenger. We regret that the incident that occurred on one of our flights did not meet these expectations. We sincerely apologize to Ms. Emma Carter and to anyone who has ever felt overlooked or wrongly assessed during their journey. We are implementing decisive measures, including retraining staff, conducting independent flight checks, and a zero-tolerance policy towards any form of discrimination. Our commitment is clear. Everyone has a place. The letter quickly spread. Media outlets reported the story, journalists sought interviews, conversations erupted online, a mix of anger and hope. Some praised the airline for its swift response. However, others argued that real change shouldn't have waited until the boss's daughter faced mistreatment. Sophia Bennett agreed with them. It shouldn't have had to come to this, but if her experience could open up a dialogue, if it could allow others to speak up, then it truly meant something. Away from the public storm, Emily Scott remained alone in her modest apartment. The city lights outside the window blended into a blur. She had been officially fired from the airline. Her employee ID had been deactivated and her email account was closed. She had spent the past few hours scrolling through online comments, her chest tightening with each word. Though she hadn't expected sympathy, the weight of public judgment left her feeling dizzy. It wasn't just her behavior on the plane. People began uncovering complaints that had been recorded over the years. The times she had hastily judged her harsh tone and her impatience had left lasting impressions. She had thought herself excellent in her role. She had believed she was well regarded, but now she realized that the small, unaddressed moments had contributed to a reputation she never knew existed. Emily Scott opened her phone and found the draft email she had started writing earlier. It was a sincere apology to Sophia Bennett. She hadn't sent it yet. Part of her wondered if it would still matter. But another part, the part that still held on to the hope of redemption, understood that the issue wasn't whether Sophia would read it. It was about owning up to her actions. She continued typing her hands, trembling slightly. "Bennett, I do not expect forgiveness from you, and I understand that an apology cannot change my actions, but I want you to know that I recognize my mistake. That day, I only saw what I wanted to see, and I let you down. I judged without truly understanding you. I am truly sorry, not because I was caught, but because I was wrong." She stared at the screen for a long moment before hitting send. The message silently vanished into the digital space. Jacob Brooks sat across from Sophia Bennett, his gaze steady, as if trying to understand every thought in her mind. "You know," he began, his voice Gentle, what you did today wasn't just for your own benefit. Sophia met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. You've shown all the young people who feel overlooked that they truly matter. Jacob continued. You've demonstrated to those who witnessed it that silence also holds power. You've shown my company that arrogance and bias have no place in our environment. Not anymore. Sophia felt a lump form in her throat, but she refused to let it spill over. She refused to let the tears fall. Not tonight. Jacob smiled, a rare but sincere smile softening the tension on his face. Today you've conveyed lessons far beyond what any meeting or announcement could impart. Sophia leaned back in her chair, absorbing his words. In that moment she didn't feel like she was doing anything heroic. It was simply necessary, but perhaps that was the essence of true strength. Doing the right thing, even when no one hands you the platform, even when the simpler choice is to step back. She looked at the thick file Jacob had placed down the new policies he was implementing in response to the recent event, a legacy that reached far beyond a single flight. More than a fleeting moment, the world outside continued bustling and complex. Yet, in this home tonight, a profound change had taken root. Later, when she was alone in the room, Sophia scrolled through her phone again. Her inbox was filled with encouraging messages, friends she hadn't connected with in years, teachers even unfamiliar faces had reached out. But she paused when she saw Emily Scott's email again. This time, she took the time to read it carefully. The writing was somewhat clumsy but sincere. Sophia chose not to reply. It wasn't necessary. Sometimes real growth doesn't come from responding, but from reflection. Emily would have to find her own way now, without the support or easy forgiveness to ease the pain. Sophia set her phone down on the bedside table, face down, and looked out the window where the stars were beginning to twinkle in the vast blue sky. She didn't feel angry anymore. She didn't carry bitterness in her heart either. A sense of peace and strength began to bloom within her chest. It was a determination that no matter where life's path would take her, or the doubts others placed upon her, she would always hold on to this moment. The moment she not only proved to those around her, but also to herself, that she deserved every space she entered, every seat she took, and every opportunity she pursued. Sophia Bennett opened her eyes, feeling a peace within her that she had never experienced before. She had been on a long journey, not just physically, but a profound inner struggle as well. She knew that the world might not always embrace her. It could still doubt her place in it. But one thing was certain, she would never doubt herself again. Sophia understood that this belief was stronger than anything others could try to take from her. As dreams began to creep into her mind, she felt tired, but not in a negative way. It was the tiredness of a victor, of someone who had risen from challenges, of someone who had earned the respect she truly deserved. Sophia realized that this wasn't the end of her journey. It was only the beginning. This is just the first step, she told herself, feeling an indescribable sense of relief. She knew she was changing, growing through every experience, and nothing could take away that confidence, that resilience. As she lay down to drift into sleep, those thoughts made her feel tranquil, ready to embrace the challenges ahead. She didn't need to fight anymore. She had proven what she needed to prove to the world and to herself. Thank you for taking the time to follow this inspiring story about Sophia Bennett. This is not just a story of injustice, but also a profound lesson about the strength of dignity, resilience, and the importance of maintaining respect in any circumstance. Sophia has proven that even though society may try to shape us through stereotypes or judge us based on appearances, the most important thing is believing in ourselves and standing firm when facing adversity. This story also reminds us that discrimination based on appearance, age, or social status is shallow and unsustainable. We must learn to stand up, protect ourselves and those around us when witnessing injustice. Sophia not only triumphed in a specific situation, but she also contributed to creating a change, however small, in how people view fundamental values like respect and fairness. This is a story that affirms that every person deserves respect, not just in luxurious spaces or from powerful people, but even in the simplest moments when we are just a passenger on a flight. Sophia didn't need to create a commotion. She simply held her ground and let the truth speak for itself. And that is true strength. This story also emphasizes an important message that every action has consequences, and we, whether in work or life, need to take responsibility for what we do. When mistakes happen, the important thing is not to avoid responsibility, but to acknowledge our errors, learn from them, and do the right thing to avoid harming others. Emily Scott has learned this, and she will have to face the consequences of her actions, a strong reminder of the necessity of respect and handling situations fairly and responsibly. Thank you once again for following this story. If you found it meaningful, feel free to like and share this video with friends and family to help spread the message of respect and fairness. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other deeply inspiring stories we'll share in the future. Together we can create a strong community where everyone is treated fairly and with respect. Remember, everyone has the right to be heard and create change. Always believe in yourself, uphold your values, and never let anyone else define your worth. Wishing you strength and determination on your journey. Thank you and see you in the next video.